She's just a security guard." That's what my dad told the guests at his wedding. I can still hear the way he said it, like my entire life was a disappointment he needed to explain away. What he didn't know was that before the night was over, every single person in that room would be staring at the TV, watching my name scroll across the screen as the woman who saved them all. My name is Emily Carter, and this is the story of how the daughter nobody respected became the one person they could never forget. If you've ever felt underestimated or judged for the path you chose in life, then this story is for you. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss more powerful stories like this one. I grew up being the daughter my father never wanted to talk about. While he built his empire as a powerful banker, I built mine in the army. 4 years in uniform taught me discipline, courage, and what it truly means to protect others. After leaving the military, I earned a degree in criminal justice and worked my way up in private security. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and it made me proud. My father? He never saw it that way. To him, I was a failure in a uniform instead of a success in a suit. My parents divorced when I was 12. Mom was a kindergarten teacher, gentle and steady, the kind of person who believed success was measured in kindness. Dad measured it in dollar signs and headlines. Living between their worlds was like walking a tightrope. With Mom, I felt safe. With Dad, I always felt like I wasn't enough. And then there was Michael, my half-brother, Dad's pride and joy. A young lawyer, the perfect reflection of everything my father wanted in a child. Every holiday, every dinner, it was Michael's accomplishments on display, while mine were dismissed with a shrug. It was a comparison I could never win. So when the wedding invitation arrived, Thomas Carter and Victoria Hayes request the honor of your presence, I almost tore it in half. But something inside me said I had to go. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was the hope that, just once, he might look at me and see more than a disappointment. I'll never forget the moment I arrived at the Rosewood Resort. The place looked like something out of a magazine spread, the kind my father's colleagues would casually flip through while sipping a $12 martini. White tents gleamed across manicured lawns that seemed too perfect to be real. Every blade of grass cut to the exact same length. Crystal chandeliers dangled from the ceiling of the ballroom, and staff in crisp uniforms floated through the space as if they were trained to never break a smile. Everything screamed wealth, polish, and perfection. The very image my father valued most. As I stepped out of the taxi, I could feel the weight of eyes on me. Women in designer dresses glanced at my simple navy blue gown, their manicured fingers clutching champagne flutes. Men in tailored suits exchanged knowing looks as if silently measuring who belonged and who didn't. And me? I already knew which category I fell into. I checked in at the front desk, the receptionist offering a polite smile that felt more like protocol than warmth. "Welcome, Miss Carter," she said, her voice crisp and professional. The way she emphasized Carter reminded me that the only reason I was even on the guest list was because of my last name, not because my father had bragged about me to anyone. The lobby buzzed with conversation. I overheard snippets about stock options, vacation homes in the Hamptons, and private schools that cost more per year than my entire salary. It was a world I had never wanted to be a part of, and yet here I was, stuck between curiosity and dread. Walking into the main hall, I caught sight of my father and his soon-to-be wife, Victoria. They looked like they had stepped straight off the cover of a luxury lifestyle magazine. He in his perfectly tailored suit, she in a fitted ivory dress with pearls glinting at her neck. Their smiles were flawless, practiced, almost mechanical. And when my father's eyes landed on me, his smile faltered for the briefest second, just long enough to remind me I wasn't the child he wanted to showcase. I slipped into the background, clutching my clutch a little tighter. The sound of laughter bounced off the marble walls, each giggle and chuckle cutting sharper than the last. Everywhere I turned, I saw people who seemed to belong. People who understood the unspoken language of wealth and privilege. I was the odd one out. The black and white photograph in a gallery full of color. That night, I realized something important. This wedding wasn't just about my father's new beginning. For me, it was a stage, a test of whether I could stand tall in a room full of people who saw me as nothing more than the daughter who failed. I told myself I'd get through it. Smile, nod, endure. But deep down, I knew the worst part was still waiting for me. The rehearsal dinner was held in a private dining room overlooking the ocean. The setting was breathtaking. White linens draped over round tables, each centerpiece overflowing with orchids and roses. The sound of waves in the distance should have been calming, but for me, it only made the tension in my chest harder to ignore. I had been placed at a peripheral table, far away from the head table where my father and Victoria sat. It felt intentional, as if even the seating chart was a reminder of where I stood in his life. Halfway through my glass of wine, I saw him approaching with an older couple in tow. My father's voice carried across the room, loud enough for half the guests to hear. "This is my daughter, Emily," he said with that trademark smile of his. "She's just a security guard." There it was. The words dropped like a hammer, flattening me in front of strangers I had never met. Just a security guard. He didn't mention the years I had served in the army, the degree I had earned, or the leadership role I held at one of the top private security firms in the country. To him, all of that was irrelevant. He wanted them to know I hadn't lived up to his definition of success. The woman smiled tightly. "Oh, how interesting." She was clearly struggling to find something polite to say. Her husband chimed in. "Richard tells us you were in the military?" I nodded. "Yes, 4 years active duty." "Well, thank you for your service." He replied quickly before steering his wife away. As they left, I caught the woman whispering under her breath. With Richard's connections, she could have been anything. The pattern repeated itself again and again. Each introduction, my father used the same phrase, his tone casual but cutting. "My daughter Emily, she's a security guard." Sometimes he added, "She chose a different path," with a shrug that said everything he didn't have the guts to say out loud. By the end of the night, I had been reduced to a title, stripped of context, stripped of pride. I smiled through it all, forcing myself to stay composed, but inside I was crumbling. I wanted to scream, to tell them who I really was and what I had accomplished. But I stayed silent, the wine glass trembling in my hand as I sipped slowly, pretending it didn't matter, pretending his words didn't sting. The photographer sitting next to me leaned in quietly. "Tough crowd," he said, his voice low and kind. "You have no idea," I whispered back. For a brief moment, I felt seen, not as a disappointment, but as a person. Still, as the dinner dragged on, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe I had made a mistake coming here. Maybe I should have stayed home, spared myself the humiliation. But leaving would have meant letting him win, letting his version of me be the only one they ever saw. And that I couldn't allow. By the time dessert was served, I had completely lost my appetite. My fork scraped aimlessly against the plate as my father laughed at something Michael said at the head table. Michael, the perfect son, the golden child, basking in the glow of approval I had never known. I felt invisible, yet at the same time painfully exposed. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, pulling out my phone with shaky hands. My first instinct was to text my mom. This was a mistake. He's introduced me as just a security guard to everyone. Within seconds, her reply came, "Emily, remember why you're proud of what you do. His opinion doesn't change your value." Her words made me pause. She was right. I had built a life worth being proud of, even if he couldn't see it. I had saved lives, prevented crises, protected people who mattered. None of that disappeared just because my father chose to reduce me to a single phrase. Still, the humiliation clung to me like a second skin. I could hear the whispers even when I wasn't in the room. She's just a guard. Imagine being Richard Carter's daughter and ending up in that line of work. Each word chipped away at me, threatening to drag me under. I leaned against the cool wall, taking deep breaths, trying to steady myself. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was from my best friend, Alicia. "Don't let him break you. You're stronger than he'll ever give you credit for." I smiled faintly through the tears threatening to spill. Maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't need his validation to stand tall. But another part of me, the little girl who had once begged for his approval, still ached, still wanted him to see me for who I really was. I returned to the dining room, forcing my shoulders back, my chin up. I avoided his gaze, choosing instead to focus on the view outside the window. The ocean stretched endlessly into the night, calm yet powerful. I told myself to be like that. Steady, strong, unshakable. As the evening wound down, I considered slipping away early, maybe catching a train back home. But something inside me whispered, "Stay." Pride, stubbornness, maybe even defiance. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. I didn't know it then, but staying would be the single most important decision of my life. Because the very next day, everything would change. The next afternoon, the ceremony was set to begin. The garden outside the resort had been transformed into something that looked like a fairy tale. Rows of white chairs lined up perfectly on either side of an aisle covered in fresh rose petals. A massive floral arch framed the ocean beyond, and the sun hit the water just right, scattering light across the scene like diamonds. Guests trickled in wearing tailored suits and glittering gowns, their laughter and chatter rising into the warm summer air. It should have felt magical, but to me, it felt suffocating. I slipped quietly into a seat near the back row. I figured the further away from the spotlight, the safer I'd feel. But old habits die hard. Years in the army, years in security. It changes the way you see the world. While everyone else admired the flowers and sipped champagne, my eyes scanned the environment, tracing exits, noting potential hazards. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct. That's when I noticed him. A man dressed as catering staff moved awkwardly among the guests. His black vest hung a little too loose, his white shirt wrinkled in a way that didn't match the crisp perfection of the other servers. More than that, his eyes didn't settle. He wasn't looking at trays or tables. He was studying the crowd. His gaze swept across faces in deliberate arcs, like he was memorizing the room, not serving it. At first, I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was new, nervous, or just not trained as well as the others. But then I saw a second man. Same uniform, same uneasy energy. And then a third, lingering by the far corner of the tent, his hand brushing his jacket a little too often, like checking something concealed. My stomach tightened. I'd seen that behavior before. Not at weddings, but in conflict zones, in chaotic markets overseas, where eyes scanned not out of curiosity, but calculation, where men carried more than trays under their jackets. I tried to focus on the ceremony, on the string quartet playing softly near the aisle. But I couldn't. Every instinct in me screamed that something was wrong. My hands gripped the edge of my chair as I tracked their movements, my pulse quickening with each suspicious glance. The problem was, I couldn't just jump up and shout, "Something's wrong." Not here. Not in front of people who already thought I was dramatic, out of place, unworthy. If I caused a scene and turned out to be wrong, my father would never let me live it down. This was his big day, his perfect society wedding, and I would have been the daughter who embarrassed him in front of everyone. I leaned back, forcing myself to breathe slowly. My training told me to observe longer before making a move. But my gut, it told me I didn't have the luxury of time. I watched as the first man disappeared briefly behind the tent, then reemerged, tugging at his sleeve. The second one adjusted his jacket again, eyes sharp, jaw tight. They weren't here to serve champagne. My chest ached with the weight of the choice. Do I act now and risk being humiliated? Or stay quiet and risk people dying? For a moment, my father's voice echoed in my head. "She's just a security guard." That sentence had followed me like a shadow, shrinking me, making me doubt myself even when I knew better. But then another voice surfaced. My mom's. "His inability to appreciate your choices is his failure, not yours." I closed my eyes briefly, gripping the chain of my necklace for strength. What mattered more? My father's pride or innocent lives? As I shifted in my seat, ready to position myself closer to the suspects, I felt a hand on my arm. "What are you doing?" Michael's voice was sharp, suspicious. He had noticed me watching the servers, my body tense like a coiled spring. "There's something wrong with those men," I whispered, my eyes never leaving them. He scoffed. "For God's sake, Emily, not here. Don't start one of your paranoid soldier routines. You're going to embarrass Dad in front of everyone." I turned to face him, my patience thinning. "Michael, I'm serious. Look at the way they're moving. That's not normal." But he shook his head, lips curling in disdain. "This is exactly why Dad never takes you seriously. You always have to make everything dramatic." His words stung sharper than I expected. I wanted to yell at him, to make him understand. But before I could, my father noticed the exchange and called out from the front row. "Emily, sit down. Stop fidgeting. You're drawing attention." His voice carried across the crowd, commanding, dismissive, just like always. Heat rushed to my face as guests turned to look. My pulse hammered in my ears, torn between obeying him and following my instincts. Inside, the little girl who had always sought his approval faltered. But the soldier, the protector in me, stood taller. "They don't believe you," I told myself, "but they'll see soon enough." The ceremony was moments away from starting when it happened. The string quartet reached the final note of their song. Guests rose to their feet as Victoria prepared to walk down the aisle, And then the man in the loose vest reached under his jacket. Time slowed. I saw the flash of metal, the unmistakable glint of a firearm. My breath caught, my body reacting before my mind had time to fully process. I shoved past Michael, ignoring his protests, and surged forward. "Gun!" I shouted, my voice slicing through the idyllic calm like a blade. Panic erupted instantly. Gasps, screams, chairs scraping against the floor as guests scattered. The man pulled his weapon free, but I was already moving, already closing the gap. Years of training kicked in. I slammed into him, knocking his arm upward just as the shot went off, shattering glass overhead. My hands locked on his wrist, twisting hard until the gun clattered to the floor. But there were more of them. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the second man reach for his jacket, the third advancing toward the crowd. Chaos spread like wildfire. Guests ducked under tables, the string quartet abandoned their instruments, screams filled the air. And in the middle of it all, I knew. This was it. This was the moment that would define me. I wasn't just a security guard. I wasn't the daughter who failed. I was the only person standing between these men and the massacre they had planned. And whether my father believed me or not, I was going to save them all. The first gunshot shattered the illusion of perfection my father had spent months building. Crystal glasses toppled, champagne spilled across white linens, and screams tore through the summer air. The man I'd tackled struggled beneath me, his face twisted in fury as he tried to wrench his arm free. My body reacted before my mind could catch up, years of training flooding back in an instant. I pinned his wrist hard against the ground, my knee driving into his chest as he gasped for breath. Another shot rang out, this one closer to the archway, and chaos erupted. Guests scattered in every direction, some tripping over chairs, others diving under tables. Women in silk gowns clawed at the grass as they scrambled to get away. Men who had spent the night bragging about their wealth now cowered, wide-eyed and helpless. I yanked the pistol from the first attacker's hand and flung it across the lawn. My heart pounded in my ears, every beat louder than the screaming around me. Two more men were moving through the crowd now, their jackets pulled back to reveal weapons glinting in the sun. They weren't here for money or jewelry. They were here to make a statement, and the wedding, my father's prize stage, was their theater. I grabbed the radio clipped inside the attacker's vest, static crackling as unfamiliar voices shouted codes back and forth. This wasn't a random hit. It was organized. That realization chilled me to my core. The second attacker locked eyes with me, his weapon raised. Instinct screamed at me to move, and I did. Rolling off the man beneath me just as bullets ripped into the chair where I'd been crouched seconds before. Grass and dirt sprayed into the air as guests shrieked louder, running blindly toward the exits. But there weren't enough exits. These men had positioned themselves perfectly, cutting off every escape. I sprinted forward, shoving a panicked guest out of the line of fire, my shoulder colliding with the second attacker's ribs. We went down hard, his gun skittering across the ground. He fought viciously, throwing elbows, but I clamped my arm around his neck, forcing him still long enough to land a solid punch across his jaw. He went limp for a split second, and I scrambled for the gun, kicking it away. The third man was shouting now, barking orders in a language I half recognized, waving his pistol wildly to keep the crowd at bay. He grabbed one of the servers by the arm, pressing the barrel against her temple. My stomach lurched. Hostage. They weren't just here to disrupt. They wanted leverage. For a moment, everything seemed to slow. My father stood frozen near the front row, his new wife clinging to his arm, both of them pale with shock. He wasn't the powerful banker anymore. He was just a terrified man watching his world collapse, and I was the only line between him and the end. Fear clawed at my throat, but beneath it was something stronger. Resolve. This was bigger than family pride, bigger than humiliation. These men had come here to hurt people, and I was the only one who could stop them. I rose slowly, hands raised, stepping forward to draw the third man's attention away from the hostage. My voice came out steady, sharper than I felt inside. "You don't want to do this. Let her go." He snarled, pressing the gun tighter against the woman's temple. The crowd whimpered in unison. My mind raced, calculating angles, distance, the weight of the pistol still warm in my grip from the earlier scuffle. One wrong move, and someone would die. This was it. This was the Mu Tuan Sin Tu I had always trained for. Not on a battlefield overseas, but here, in the very place where I'd been told I was nothing. And now, in front of everyone who had ever doubted me, I had to prove the one thing I'd always known deep down. I wasn't just a guard. I was a protector. The gunman's shout cut through the chaos. "Nobody moves." His voice was guttural, vibrating with rage, the pistol pressed tight against the server's temple. Guests froze mid-scream, hands raised, their eyes darting frantically for safety that wasn't there. The air was thick with terror, every second stretching long and heavy. I kept my focus on the attacker, my hands slightly raised, my body angled to shield as many guests as possible. But then, from behind me, I heard the one voice I dreaded most. "Emily, stop this nonsense." It was my father, his tone sharp even in the middle of a life-or-death standoff. My chest tightened. "Dad, stay back," I snapped, not taking my eyes off the gunman. But he wasn't listening. His voice carried across the garden, commanding as always. "You're making things worse. Just sit down and let the police handle this." The police? They weren't even here yet. And when they did arrive, if I didn't hold this man's attention, someone would already be dead. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Of all the times for him to belittle me, he chose now, when I was literally the only one standing between these people and a massacre. Before I could respond, Michael's voice chimed in from somewhere to my left. "Dad's right. Emily, you're escalating it. Let them take what they want. Stop playing hero." My teeth ground together as rage and disbelief surged in my chest. Playing hero? My brother, the golden boy, the lawyer who had never faced anything scarier than a courtroom cross-examination, was telling me, a veteran, a trained security professional, that I was making things worse. The hostage whimpered, the gun digging deeper into her skin, and I knew I couldn't let their words distract me. But still, they cut deep. It was always the same. No matter what I did, no matter what I risked, they saw me as less. Even with a gun pointed at an innocent woman's head, I was the embarrassment, the reckless one, the screw-up. The gunman barked something in another language, his grip tightening, his eyes flicking nervously between me and the terrified crowd. I had seconds, maybe less. And yet, over the pounding of my own pulse, I could still hear my father's voice. "Emily, please stop embarrassing us." Embarrassing them. That's what he thought this was about. Not lives, not the woman begging silently for help. Just his image, his perfect wedding day, his spotless reputation. I swallowed hard, forcing my focus back to the gunman. My father's words were a blade, but I had survived worse wounds. I reminded myself of the truth. I was the only one here with the skills to stop this. Not my father, not Michael, not anyone else in this crowd of polished elites. Me. I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. Let her go. You don't want to do this. The attacker's eyes snapped back to me, his teeth bared. He shouted something I didn't understand, jerking the hostage closer. She gasped, tears streaking down her face. Emily. Michael's voice cracked now, high with fear. You'll get us all killed. I wanted to laugh at the irony. You're already halfway there, I thought bitterly. Their fear was real, yes, but their doubt, their refusal to see me for who I was, that stung almost more than the gun inches from the woman's skull. And yet, in that moment, their disbelief fueled me. Every insult, every dismissal, every time they'd called me just a guard, burned hot in my chest. If I was going to be underestimated, fine. But I'd make damn sure they underestimated me for the last time. I locked eyes with the gunman and steadied my breath. My father and brother's voices faded into the background. No longer anchors dragging me down, but sparks igniting a fire I hadn't felt in years. For the first time all weekend, I wasn't ashamed. I wasn't small. I was exactly who I was meant to be. Dangerously capable and ready to prove it. The world around me blurred. The screams, the sobs, even the sound of my father's voice. All of it dimmed into background noise. What cut through was the cold press of reality. One slip, one hesitation, and someone would die. The hostage's eyes locked with mine, wide and wet, silently begging me to do something. But in the pit of my stomach, fear coiled tight. Not fear of the gunman. No, I'd faced men like him before, in darker places halfway across the world. This fear was different. It was the fear of failing here, in front of the very people who had always doubted me. The fear that if I faltered, my father would be proven right. I wasn't good enough. I was just a guard. I could hear Michael's voice echoing like a drumbeat. You'll get us all killed. And beneath it, my father's cutting words. Stop embarrassing us. They didn't trust me. They never had. Even now, with guns pointed at their friends, with chaos unfolding at their perfect wedding, their instinct was to believe I would make things worse. My throat tightened, heat rushing to my eyes. For a split second, doubt clawed at me. What if they were right? What if my instincts failed me? What if this time I wasn't fast enough, smart enough, strong enough? Then, like a whisper in the storm, I heard another voice. Softer, steadier, my mom's. His inability to appreciate your choices is his failure, not yours. You built a life to be proud of. Don't forget that. I closed my eyes just long enough to take one steadying breath. When I opened them again, everything sharpened. The weight of the pistol I'd taken from the first attacker, the trembling of the hostage's shoulders, the beads of sweat gathering on the gunman's brow. All of it came into focus. My training wasn't gone. My instincts weren't broken. I was exactly where I needed to be. But that didn't erase the ache in my chest. Because even as adrenaline steadied my hands, my heart still ached for something it had craved since childhood. My father's belief in me. I needed him to see me. Not as a failure, not as a disappointment, not as just a guard, but as his daughter standing between death and survival. The conflict tore at me. Duty against longing, courage against doubt. Could I save them without breaking myself in the process? Could I protect the people who had never protected me? The gunman shouted again, dragging the hostage closer, his hand trembling with impatience. I could see it in his eyes. He was seconds away from pulling the trigger. The crowd gasped as he pressed the barrel tighter. My pulse pounded. This was it. No more hesitation. No more waiting for permission. No more craving validation from a man who had never given it. I straightened, lifting my chin. For the first time all day, I didn't care if my father was watching. I didn't care what Michael thought. This wasn't about them. It was about her, the woman crying in front of me. It was about the children screaming in the crowd. It was about every life hanging in the balance. I whispered to myself so softly only I could hear, "You are not small. You are not weak. You are not just a guard." And with that, I moved. The moment I stepped forward, everything exploded into motion. The gunman jerked his weapon toward me, barking something sharp in a foreign tongue. The hostage screamed, thrashing against his grip, her terror splintering the air like glass shattering on marble. My muscles coiled tight, my breath sharp in my chest. This was the break, the second I had been waiting for. I lunged. The world narrowed to tunnel vision. I slammed into him with every ounce of force I had, the impact knocking us both off balance. The gun went off. Once, twice, deafening cracks that sent guests diving to the ground. But his aim was wild, bullets tearing into the air instead of flesh. My hand clamped his wrist, twisting hard, my knee driving into his thigh until he roared in pain. The hostage tumbled free, scrambling into the crowd as gasps and shouts rose all around us. For a heartbeat, relief surged through me. One life saved. But there was no time to celebrate. The second attacker was back on his feet, charging from the side. I caught the movement at the edge of my vision, rolled away just as his fist swung past my face. My body hit the grass hard, the breath knocked from my lungs, but I forced myself up. His eyes burned with fury as he drew a knife from his belt, the blade glinting in the sunlight. Adrenaline surged. I shifted my weight, circling him, every nerve screaming. Behind him, I glimpsed my father. Frozen, pale, his arms wrapped protectively around Victoria. He looked helpless, terrified, the mighty Thomas Carter stripped of his power in an instant. And for the first time in my life, he was looking at me. Not with disdain, not with disappointment, but with raw, desperate hope. It ignited something fierce inside me. The attacker lunged, knife flashing. I sidestepped, grabbing his arm mid-swing and twisting until his wrist cracked, the blade clattering to the ground. My boot came down hard, kicking it out of reach. He snarled, swinging his other fist, but I countered with a sharp elbow to his jaw. He crumpled, groaning, but still conscious. Before I could finish it, the third man, the leader, fired a shot into the air, silencing the chaos instantly. "Enough!" he roared, his accent thick, his eyes wild. The crowd froze, whimpers cutting off as every head turned toward him. He pointed his pistol at me now, his voice dripping with venom. "You think you're a hero? You think you can stop us?" The barrel lined up with my chest, and for a flicker of a second, I thought, this is it. The end. But something inside me refused to yield. My hands trembled, yes, but my voice came out steady, louder than I'd ever heard it. "Put the gun down, right now." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My father's breath hitched. Michael muttered something under his breath, but I didn't flinch. I couldn't. The leader sneered, finger tightening on the trigger. Time slowed again. My pulse loud in my ears, the world suspended in fragile silence. And then, sirens. Distant at first, then closer. The shrill wail of police rushing toward the resort. Relief flickered in the guest's eyes. The gunman's confidence faltered. That half-second hesitation was all I needed. I surged forward, grabbing his arm just as he pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, tearing into the floral arch instead of my chest. We collided hard, the gun jerking between us as we fought for control. My nails dug into his wrist. His elbows slammed into my ribs, pain bursting hot and sharp. But I held on with everything I had. The crowd screamed as we wrestled, feet tearing trenches into the grass. He was strong, but desperation made me stronger. With a final wrench, I twisted the pistol free and swung it out of his reach. He stumbled back, furious, and that's when the officers flooded in, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Within seconds, the attackers were on the ground, restrained, their rage spilling into curses that meant nothing now. The nightmare was over. I stood there shaking, chest heaving, the gun still warm in my hand. My dress was torn, my knuckles bloodied, my ribs aching, but I was standing, alive. And when I finally lifted my gaze, the sight nearly undid me. My father. His face ashen, his eyes wide. Not with disappointment, not with disdain, but with something I'd never seen before. Awe. In that silence, heavy with everything unsaid, I realized the truth. For the first time in my life, he had seen me. Not just a guard, not a failure, but the daughter who had saved them all. The garden looked nothing like the fairy tale it had been an hour ago. Chairs were overturned, rose petals scattered across the ground like the remains of something sacred torn apart. Shattered glass sparkled under the fading sun, reminders of bullets that had missed their targets by inches. The air still smelled faintly of gunpowder, sharp and metallic, clinging to the back of my throat. For a long moment, no one moved. The attackers were pinned to the ground, cuffed and dragged away by police officers barking commands. But the crowd, the elegant, wealthy guests who had once laughed and gossiped freely, stood frozen, their designer clothes rumpled, their faces pale. Their eyes weren't on the police. They weren't on the broken arch or the ruined tables. They were on me. I felt their stares like a weight pressing down on my chest. Minutes ago, those same eyes had dismissed me, whispered about me, reduced me to a punchline. Now they were wide, unblinking, full of something I had never seen directed at me in this family. Respect. My hands trembled as I lowered the pistol, setting it carefully on a nearby table before stepping back. My knees ached, my ribs throbbed from where the attacker had slammed into me, and I realized how close I had come to not walking away at all. A sharp sting in my palm caught my attention. Blood smeared across my skin where my knuckles had split open. Someone whispered, "She saved us." Another voice followed, louder, trembling. She stopped them. Then a ripple of sound moved through the crowd, fragments of awe and disbelief. I looked around, my breathing still ragged. Women clutched their pearls, mascara streaked down their faces. Men who had spent the night bragging about stock portfolios now clung to one another, shaky and undone. And through it all, their gazes kept returning to me. The daughter who didn't belong. The one they had all pitied or ignored. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. And yet, standing in the center of their astonishment, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt raw, exposed, fragile in a way I hadn't expected. My body was buzzing with adrenaline, but underneath was a deep ache, an exhaustion that went beyond muscles and bones. Somewhere in the crowd, I caught sight of Michael. He was pale, his suit jacket smeared with dirt, his mouth slightly open. For once, he had nothing to say. No smug comments, no cutting remarks, just silence. Then my eyes found my father. Thomas Carter stood motionless near the front row, his arms still wrapped around Victoria. But unlike the others, his expression wasn't just shock. It was something deeper, heavier. His jaw was slack, his eyes locked on me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. For the first time in my life, he didn't look like the man in control of every room he walked into. He looked lost. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the distant sound of police radios crackling. I wanted to look away, to retreat, to vanish from the spotlight. But my feet stayed planted. After everything, after years of being dismissed, ignored, belittled, I couldn't run. Not now. I drew in a shaky breath, straightened my spine despite the pain in my ribs, and met his gaze head on. The weight of a lifetime pressed between us in that single look. Every cutting remark, every shrug, every just a guard. And for the first time, he had nothing to say. For a long while, my father didn't move. He just stood there, frozen among the wreckage of his perfect wedding, his eyes locked on me as if he were seeing me for the very first time. Victoria clutched his arm, whispering something into his ear, but he didn't seem to hear her. His focus never wavered. Finally, he stepped forward. Just one step at first. Hesitant, almost unsteady. The man I had grown up with, the one who commanded boardrooms, who barked orders like a general, looked stripped of all authority. His shoulders sagged beneath the weight of everything he'd just witnessed. As he closed the distance between us, I felt my pulse quicken. Not from fear of the attackers anymore, but from something far more complicated. My heart hammered in my chest as if I were back to being that 12-year-old girl again, waiting for a word of approval that never came. When he finally stopped in front of me, his mouth opened, then closed again. He looked almost fragile. "Emily," he began, his voice low, rougher than I'd ever heard it. I clenched my fist to steady myself. I wouldn't let him sweep this under the rug. Not this time. "You don't get to say my name like that," I said quietly, though my voice carried enough strength to hush the murmurs around us. "Not after what you've done. Not after the way you've treated me." His eyes widened, the shame flickering across his face unmistakable. He started to protest, but I cut him off. Years of swallowed words, of biting my tongue, surged to the surface. "All my life you've dismissed me," I continued, my voice trembling not with weakness but with fury held too long. "You mapped out a life for me that I never wanted. And when I chose my own path, you decided I was nothing. Every holiday, every dinner, every introduction, you reminded me I was a disappointment. Just a security guard." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The words I repeated weren't just for him anymore. They were for everyone who had heard them from his lips, everyone who had laughed or smirked at my expense. "You never asked what I really did." I pressed on, tears burning at the corners of my eyes. "You never cared that I served 4 years in the Army, that I went back to school, that I built a career protecting people. You chose not to see me. And tonight, if I hadn't been here, if I hadn't trusted myself instead of you, people would have died." He winced, the truth landing harder than any blow. For once, Thomas Carter, the man who always had an answer, had none. His lips parted, but no excuses came. The silence was deafening. Guests leaned in, their champagne glasses forgotten, their eyes darting between us. The powerful banker and the daughter he had once belittled now stood center stage, roles reversed. Finally, he spoke, his voice so soft I almost didn't hear it. "I didn't know. A bitter laugh escaped me. Number you didn't want to know. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. He lowered his gaze, shame washing over him, and for the first time in my life, I felt taller than him. Stronger, unshakable. I didn't say anything more. I didn't need to. The weight of the truth had already crushed the image he'd built. And in its place, there was only me, the daughter he could no longer ignore. He stood there trembling, lips parting, but no words coming out. And then, to the shock of every guest, Thomas Carter, the powerful man who always towered above others, fell to his knees. The sound of his tailored pants brushing against the damp grass silenced the entire garden. Whispers died, sobs cut short, even the clicks of cameras stopped. All eyes widened as my father, the man who had belittled me my entire life, bowed low before me, his hands shaking as he reached for mine. Emily. His voice cracked, broken in a way I had never heard before. My daughter. I'm sorry, I was wrong. Wrong about everything. I froze. For years I had imagined what it might feel like for him to finally admit it. But never. Never like this. The man who once walked into boardrooms like a king was now kneeling in the dirt, stripped of all pride. He went on, his voice trembling so badly the words nearly collapsed. I was blind. My pride, my arrogance. I let it blind me. I made you feel small, worthless. I made you believe you weren't enough, but tonight, you saved us. You saved me. His chin dropped lower, his words breaking into sobs. If I could trade every dollar, every ounce of status just to win back your trust, I would. A muffled sob broke from somewhere in the crowd. Guests? Those same people who had laughed at the words, "just a security guard," were now wiping their eyes. Even Michael, my brother, the golden boy, bowed his head, unable to meet my gaze. I drew in a deep breath as tears finally slid down my cheeks. My whole life I had waited for this moment. But strangely, standing there watching him kneel, I didn't feel the triumph I once longed for. I felt lighter, freer, as though a weight I had carried since childhood had finally lifted. I didn't rush to pull him up. I let him kneel there. Let him sit in the wreckage of the pride that had crushed me for so long. And then softly I said, "Dad, what I needed wasn't today's apology. What I needed was for you to see me. Truly see me, years ago." He broke then. A sob racked through his chest, raw and unguarded. He was no longer Thomas Carter the banker, no longer the polished man on magazine covers. He was just a father, undone before the daughter he had finally learned to see. The silence that followed my father's collapse was thick, heavy, almost sacred. But as I stood there, blinking through tears, I felt another presence shift in the corner of my vision. Michael. My brother had always been the golden one. The law degree, the sharp suits, the perfect speeches that made our father beam with pride. He had been everything I wasn't, everything I was told I should have been. And tonight, he had echoed my father's disbelief, called me reckless, told me I was making things worse. Now, he stood a few feet away, shoulders slumped, his perfect suit torn at the cuff, his eyes refusing to meet mine. For the first time, Michael didn't look untouchable. He looked small, ashamed. He took a hesitant step forward. "Emily." His voice cracked, softer than I'd ever heard it. I don't even know what to say." I swallowed hard, my body still trembling from adrenaline, my chest aching where the gunman's elbow had struck me. "Try the truth," I whispered. He flinched. The words hit him harder than I expected. He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes darting between me and the ground. "You're right. I didn't believe you. I never have. When you said something was wrong, I thought you were just trying to, I don't know, steal the spotlight. I didn't think—" His voice broke again, and for once he dropped the polished mask. "I didn't think you were capable of what you just did." The honesty stung almost as much as the dismissals had. I let the silence stretch, let him sit in his own discomfort. Around us, guests were still whispering, still staring. But all I could see was the brother who had been held up as proof of my failure. Finally, I spoke. My voice was steady, though my heart was racing. "Do you know what it feels like to spend your entire life being compared? To be told every single holiday that you weren't enough, not because of what you did, but because you weren't him? Because you weren't you?" His jaw tightened. "Emily, I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean it." I cut him off sharply. "That's the problem, Michael. You never meant to hurt me, but you did. Every time you laughed at Dad's comments, every time you let him introduce me like I was nothing, every time you stood by and stayed silent, you hurt me." He looked stricken, guilt etched deep in his features. For once, Michael Carter, the golden boy, had no defense. "I'm sorry," he whispered finally. The words were so quiet I almost missed them. "I am so sorry." Tears stung my eyes again, but this time I didn't let them fall. I held his gaze, searching for something. Remorse, truth, maybe even love. "Sorry doesn't erase years, Michael. Sorry doesn't erase the fact that when it mattered most, you doubted me again." He nodded, his face crumpling. "I know. I don't expect you to forgive me right now. But I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I see you, that I respect you, that I'm proud of you." The words caught me off guard. For a second, I saw the little boy he used to be, the brother I had once loved before resentment built walls between us. Maybe, just maybe, he meant it. I took a shaky breath. "We'll see," I said softly. Not a rejection, not yet forgiveness, but a crack in the armor. Enough to let a sliver of possibility through. For the first time, Michael's eyes lifted to meet mine. And in that moment, with chaos still smoldering around us, I saw him not as my rival, not as my father's golden child, but simply as my brother. The sound of sirens faded into the distance as the last of the attackers were taken away in squad cars. The chaos of the night lingered in overturned chairs and broken glass, but the garden itself had gone eerily still. Guests were huddled in small groups, whispering in hushed tones, stealing glances at me as though they weren't sure whether to approach or stay back. And then, from the far end of the lawn, a new sound cut through the murmurs. The clicking of cameras, the shuffle of hurried footsteps. Local news crews had arrived. Reporters in sharp suits and practical flats rushed forward, microphones in hand, their cameramen swinging bright lights toward the center of the wreckage. One of them spotted me, disheveled and bloodied, my dress torn at the shoulder, bruises already forming along my ribs. "That's her," the reporter whispered urgently to her cameraman. "That's the woman who stopped them." Before I could move, a microphone was thrust in front of me. "Emily Carter?" the reporter asked breathlessly. "You were inside when the attack happened. Witnesses say you disarmed one of the gunmen yourself. Can you tell us what happened?" I blinked against the harsh light, my mouth dry. The crowd behind me seemed to draw closer. Guests who had dismissed me hours earlier, now eager to hear every word. "I did what I had to do," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "They were going to hurt people. I couldn't let that happen." The reporter's eyes widened. Are you trained in law enforcement? I served 4 years in the military, I explained, keeping my tone calm. And I work in private security now. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Words like military, security, and served carried weight. Suddenly, the title, just a guard, didn't sound so small anymore. Another reporter shouted from the side, How many lives do you think you saved tonight? I shook my head. That's not for me to say. I just did my job. Behind me, a voice rang out, louder than the murmurs, steadier than the whispers. She saved all of us. I turned, and there he was, my father. His face was pale, his eyes still red from tears, but his voice carried the weight of truth. He stepped forward, closer to the cameras, closer to me. This is my daughter, Emily Carter, he declared, his voice breaking only slightly. And tonight, she is the reason we are standing here alive. Gasps rippled again, but this time it wasn't disbelief. It was awe. Guests who had smirked at me during dinner hours before now stood straighter, their gazes softening with admiration. Some even nodded, murmuring words of agreement. The camera swung back to me, capturing the moment in stark clarity. The once dismissed daughter standing tall, the father who had belittled her now proclaiming her as his savior. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. My silence spoke louder than any speech. I had nothing left to prove. But as the reporters continued their questions, as the crowd buzzed with words like hero and courage, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, I wasn't craving validation. I wasn't desperate for their approval. I knew who I was. Still, hearing my father finally say the words, finally recognize me, not as a disappointment, but as his daughter, sent a warmth through my chest I hadn't expected. It didn't erase the years of hurt, but it was a start. The reporter turned back to the camera, her voice firm, rehearsed. Breaking news tonight. Chaos at the Carter-Hayes wedding nearly turned deadly. But thanks to the quick actions of one woman, tragedy was averted. Emily Carter, a military veteran and security professional, is being hailed as the hero who saved dozens of lives. The words echoed through the crowd, carried on every phone screen, every live broadcast. For once, the world wasn't laughing at me. They were listening. And as the lights glared and the cameras rolled, I stood taller, bruised but unbroken, no longer invisible. In the days that followed, the story of the wedding spread like wildfire. Headlines blazed across every newspaper, every news broadcast, every online feed. Daughter saves dozens in wedding attack. From just a guard to hero, Emily Carter's courage. My phone lit up with messages from strangers, from old friends, even from colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years. Some called me brave, some called me a hero. But the word I heard most often, the one that almost made me laugh, was extraordinary. For so long, I had been told I was ordinary at best, disappointing at worst. Now, the world seemed to finally see what I had always known in my heart. I was more than enough. At work, my boss called me into his office, his eyes shining with pride. Emily, you've always been one of our best, but after what you did, people need to see your leadership. We want to promote you. Head of operations. The words filled me with a warmth I hadn't expected. For once, my professional worth wasn't a secret kept in the shadows. It was undeniable. But as my world opened, as opportunities poured in, I watched my father's world crumble. The same cameras that had once captured his flawless society smile now replayed the moment he had dropped to his knees before me. clips of him saying, "She's just a security guard," side by side with footage of me disarming armed men, became viral. The contrast was brutal. Commentators ridiculed him, calling him arrogant, blind, a man too obsessed with status to see the treasure in front of him. His business associates distanced themselves, wary of being linked to his humiliation. Victoria, his new wife, was seen less and less at his side, her perfect smile replaced by a cold distance. And Michael, though trying to repair what we had, could not shield him from the storm of public opinion. I didn't rejoice in his downfall, but I didn't pity him either. This was his reckoning. For years he had dismissed me, reduced me, embarrassed me. And now the world saw him for what he really was, a man who had failed as a father. Meanwhile, I stood taller than I ever had. Invitations arrived for interviews, panels, even a medal of bravery from the mayor. Each recognition was a reminder that I had carved my own path, and that path had led here. Not because of his approval, but in spite of his rejection. I remember one particular moment that sealed the contrast forever. A reporter asked me, "Live on air. Emily, what do you want people to remember most about what happened that night?" I paused, thought of my father's bowed head, his voice breaking as he begged forgiveness. And then I answered, "I want them to remember that worth isn't decided by titles or status. It's proven in what you do when it matters most. My father once introduced me as just a guard. But that night, being a guard meant saving lives, and I'll never be ashamed of that." The studio erupted in applause, and somewhere across the city, I imagined my father watching, forced to hear the truth echo louder than his pride ever had. Two worlds, two fates. His empire of appearances crumbling, while mine, built on grit, sacrifice, and truth, finally rose into the light. In the weeks after the wedding, life settled into a strange rhythm. The world moved on to the next story, as it always does, but for my family, the shock lingered like a wound that refused to close. Michael called often. At first, I ignored him. His voice on my voicemail was shaky, full of apologies he hadn't been able to say in person that night. Eventually, I picked up. He didn't try to defend himself this time. He didn't pretend to be the golden child. He simply said, "I want to be your brother again, if you'll let me." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but I gave him a chance. A coffee here, a phone call there. Slowly, brick by brick, the wall between us began to crack. For once, we spoke not as rivals, but as siblings, two people finally tired of the roles our father had forced on us. With my father, things were different. The humiliation of that night clung to him everywhere he went. The man who had once walked into every room with confidence now entered with lowered eyes. Business meetings grew colder. Former allies distanced themselves. Whispers followed him through polished lobbies. His empire was still intact, but his image, the thing he prized most, was shattered. Victoria, his perfect new bride, didn't escape unscathed either. Cameras had caught the moment she clutched his arm while he froze, helpless as I fought for their lives. Tabloids speculated endlessly. Did she marry the wrong Carter? The glamorous photo shoots disappeared. Her smile dulled, and eventually she stopped appearing at his side at all. When he called me weeks later, his voice was heavy, stripped of all authority. "Emily, could we talk?" Part of me wanted to hang up, to let him drown in the silence he had once condemned me to. But another part, the part that still remembered being a little girl waiting for her father's approval, told me to listen. We met at a small cafe, far from the glittering world he once inhabited. He looked older somehow, lines deeper, shoulders stooped. He tried to smile, but it faltered. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said quietly, "but I need you to know, every day since that night, I've thought about how wrong I was. Not just at the wedding, your whole life." His eyes glistened, but I stayed silent, letting the weight of his words hang. "I thought being a father meant shaping you into what I thought you should be. But all I did was break the very bond I should have cherished most. And when you stood there, when you saved us, I realized I had spent years blind to the person you are. Strong, brave, more than I ever deserved to call my daughter." The cafe was quiet, the clink of coffee cups in the background almost too soft to notice. I stared at him, the man who had defined so much of my pain, and felt a strange mix of anger and pity. "I don't need your forgiveness," he added, his voice breaking. "I just need your chance to try." I leaned back, my chest heavy with conflicting emotions. For so long, I had dreamed of this moment. Now that it was here, I realized the truth. I didn't need his apology to validate me anymore. I already knew my worth. But maybe there was room for something new. Not the father I had always wanted, not the perfect family we'd never been, but something fragile, imperfect, human. I nodded once. "We'll see," I said softly, the same words I had given Michael. He exhaled, relief washing over him, and in that moment I saw not the powerful banker, not the arrogant man who had cast me aside, but simply a father, broken and humbled, desperate for a second chance. And that was punishment enough. Months passed, but the echoes of that night never really faded. For me, life became fuller, brighter, more meaningful. For him, life became a mirror he could no longer bear to look into. I was invited to speak at a city ceremony where the mayor pinned a Medal of Valor to my jacket. My company promoted me to head of operations. Strangers stopped me in the street to thank me, some with tears in their eyes, saying, "You made me believe in courage again." And for the first time in my life, I walked into rooms with my head held high. Not because I wanted their approval, but because I finally saw myself clearly. I had always been enough. More than enough. Meanwhile, my father's life unraveled. Business partners treated him politely, but with quiet pity. The boardroom respect he had once commanded had evaporated, replaced by whispers of the viral clip of him sneering, "She's just a security guard," before falling to his knees in front of me. The man who had once thrived on status was now defined by shame. Even at family gatherings, people looked at me first, not him. For years, I had been his shadow, the daughter he tried to hide. Now, he was mine. The man known for underestimating his own child, and that was the truest punishment of all. Still, I chose not to hate him. Hate would have chained me to him forever, and I was finally free. Instead, I let him sit in the silence of his own regrets while I built the life I deserved. Sometimes, late at night, I think back to the little girl I used to be, the one who stood on the sidelines, desperate for her father's approval. I wish I could hold her hand and whisper, "One day, you won't need him to see you. One day, you'll see yourself." Because that's the real victory. Not the headlines, not the medal, not even the applause. The real victory was reclaiming my worth, proving, to myself most of all, that I was never just anything. So if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been dismissed or told you were small, let my story remind you. Your value isn't defined by the titles others give you. It's defined by what you do, by the courage you carry, by the moments when you refuse to back down even as the world doubts you. That night, I wasn't just a guard. I was a protector, a fighter, a daughter who rose above every doubt. And in the end, I became the one thing they could never forget. So if you've ever been told you were just something, remember, you are more. You always have been. And if stories like mine give you strength, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another powerful revenge story. This is Hidden Family Revenge Stories, where we bring you the tales that prove sometimes the best revenge is simply living a life they can never take away from you.